This is one of the busiest commercial crossings in North America. About 400 million of goods crosses the border every day, so it's a lifeline. And this bridge almost didn't happen. That's because the billionaire family that owns that bridge over there, the Ambassador Bridge, tried for years to stop it. The $5 billion Gordie Howe Bridge has opened, but trucks are still waiting. President Donald Trump's 25% automotive tax has turned it into a nightmare for steel giants. The new Gordie Howe Bridge spanning the Detroit River with 300,000 tons of steel was supposed to relieve border traffic of 10,000 trucks a day. But before the ribbon could be cut, a single sentence from Washington ruined everything. Now factories in Windsor are closing shifts. Foundries in Detroit have fallen silent, and engine blocks that should be passing under the bridge are rotting on the docks. The $5 billion mega project has suddenly become the subject of white elephant rumors. So how did the tariff crisis collapse the bridge's bonds and paralyze the Michigan-Ontario supply chain? We will examine the details of the latest developments around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like our videos to stay up to date with our content. When the steel towers rising on both sides of the Detroit River first pierced the horizon in the freezing February of 2019, the clock in Michigan read 7 in the morning as the fog lifted from the main cables suspended hundreds of meters above the concrete blocks of the Windsor waterfront. No one could have predicted that the name Gordie Howe would soon become shorthand for a political storm. At that moment, the only thought was to complete the brand new crossing, which would clear the Great Lakes corridor of up to 12,000 trucks a day. On schedule, the Canadian government had taken on the project with public funds and secured financing of nearly 5 billion tolls through a bond model that differed from market conditions, pledging future toll revenues as collateral. From Detroit's perspective, the new bridge simply meant relieving the burden on the aging Ambassador. Since 1929, heavy trucks and cars had been forced to pass over the same narrow deck, and the expansion joints on the road surface had to be repaired almost every Sunday. The engineers had prepared drawings that looked like a utopia on paper. A 6-lane, 1.5 meters long system with a main span of 853 millers and a steel concrete composite deck that distributed wind loads evenly. The design team had tilted the support towers slightly backward to ensure that the cables would sit in the trough, thereby reducing the infrastructure risk premium through government guarantees. The Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority calculates revenue flow based on an assumption of an average of $6 per vehicle. According to independent auditor reports, the bridge will not only finance itself within 30 years, but will also generate a net cash surplus for the Canadian Treasury in the following decade. At that time, the indicators were all pointing north, because the Detroit-Windsor automotive belt operated on a just-in-time principle, creating guaranteed volume as parts crossed the border multiple times, always using the same bridge. However, news from Washington in the spring of 2025 threw a wrench in the works. The Trump administration announced plans to impose a 25% tariff on cars made in Canada and Mexico, citing Section 232 of the 1974 Trade Act, and claiming that the move was necessary to reduce foreign dependence that threatened national security. While the White House spokesman claimed that the decision would revive the domestic supply chain, the Ministry of Finance in Ottawa convened an emergency unit. On the same day, deputies identified the first avenues of appeal available under the USMCA's neutral arbitration provisions. But the crunching calculator saw the real disaster in the supply chain. A Ford EDG's engine block is cast in Michigan, processed in Ontario, fitted with a valve train in Ohio, and assembled in Windsor. The same part crosses the border 6 to 8 times before assembly is complete if tariffs are reimposed at each crossing. The total cost increased per vehicle could jump to $4 to $5,000. Blue uniformed workers lined up in the parking lot of the Stellantis plant in Windsor and flooded the Union Hall the morning after the announcement. Unifor President Lana Payne shouted from behind the podium, "The logic that labels us a national security threat is stabbing the heart of the logistics system." And the crowd instantly drowned out their deep fear with applause. But the applause was hollow because when the production line stops, hope is longer than a tea break at the same time. Teamster spokesperson Ben Hollis appeared on a conference call with 100 cameras on behalf of truck drivers in Detroit when the load goes down. The first thing that goes down is the bread on the driver's table. These aren't abstract statistics, these are real families. As the images flashed across television screens, the Canadian Ministry of Industry added a grey box titled Tariff Scenario to its presentations, filled with negative numbers stacked on top of each other. The financial anatomy of the project came under close scrutiny from Canadian Treasury experts on one side and pension funds in New York that had invested in the bonds on the other. The bridge's annual revenue of $70 million from tolls was sufficient to comfortably cover debt service. According to the model prepared in 2018, a stress test conducted by Deotte Consultants stated, even if shopping and tourism vehicle traffic drops by 40%, truck traffic will offset the revenue loss thanks to the guarantee of automotive volume. Now that guarantee was about to disappear, the Bank of Canada's currency risk desk was forced to recommend extending currency hedge windows because customs duties were putting downward pressure on the Canadian dollar as they increased logistics costs, and the exchange rate was fluctuating beyond the reach of domestic interest rate policy. The Detroit economy on the other side of the bridge also felt the storm. Louise Carmichael, a regional development professor at Michigan State University, highlighted the fragility of lower-tier suppliers in a presentation to the local council, stating, "Without imported engine blocks from Canada, 15 small foundries in Wayne County that do contract work will close, which means a chain break on the US side as well." It wasn't just the automotive industry that took a hit. Agriculture also suffered. The Windsor-Essex region exports tomatoes, cucumbers, and greenhouse-grown peppers to the US, while Michigan sends soybeans, corn, and beans to Canada. Ottawa acted swiftly in preparing its retaliation list, imposing additional tariffs on Michigan-produced pulse products under a high political impact strategy. According to records from the Octocal supply chain data platform, Michigan bean shipment reservations to Ontario fell 27% in 3 weeks. Following the tax announcement alone, the economic shock also realigned local politics. Windsor Mayor Colleen Hann threatened to cut funding for cultural events until Washington withdrew its minus tariff, while inviting Ottawa to temporarily subsidize the new bridge tolls. Some members of the Detroit City Council called for the decision to be limited, saying that the federal tax decision is holding the local economy hostage. Meanwhile, partisan politics were fueling the fire. Republican delegates in Michigan filled pre-election rallies with slogans like "Breaking free from foreign import dependency is now a national issue," while Democratic senators were scrambling to avoid losing worker votes in the state's automotive heartland. The Gordie Howe Bridge's financing agreements did not include traffic volume commitments, but the indirect amortization model was tied to a projected vehicle passage parameter. If this parameter deviated by 30–35%, the federal guarantee for the public-private partnership's debt service would be extended, placing an additional burden on the Canadian Treasury Deputy Finance Minister. Luke Shawn wrote in his notebook, during a secret meeting, "We told the public that the bridge would not create a tax burden if the situation changes. It will be difficult to defend budget discipline." The Moran family, the private owners of the Ambassador Bridge, suddenly gained an unexpected advantage. If the new giant built by the state did not reach full capacity, it would not threaten the Ambassador's existence. At least in the early years, based on behind-the-scenes information, the local press revealed that the family had written letters titled "National Security Concerns" to lobbyists. while the tariff regulation was being discussed in the Congressional Committee. The Morand camp did not respond to requests for comment, but the political suspicion reflected in the shadow of the old bridge triggered the white elephant syndrome in Ottawa's mind. In this environment, the project office began to look for technical solutions to the crisis. First, a rail-on-road adaptation of the new bridge was proposed. The deck would be stabilized with concrete and fiber sensor rail sections, would be installed to allow light freight trains to move in tandem with trailers, thereby increasing cargo diversity. However, a feasibility review brought the additional cost to $450 million, which was withdrawn because it further destabilized the already strained financial balance. Then came the proposal to add a new customs hall to the Detroit Intermodal Terminal to speed up inspections. This version was estimated to cost $160 million, but it was determined that the time savings would only amount to 5 to 10 minutes. As long as tariffs remained in place, the opposition leader in the Canadian Parliament told the media, "We wrote a check for the bridge based on trust, and now we are reaping the consequences of that trust, reinforcing the claim that the government had put all its eggs in one basket." Although the government tried to cool down the process by saying that it would initiate international arbitration, the US has little legal room for maneuver in security-related regulations, such as Section 232. Ottawa's first step was to request special consultations between allies under the WTO dispute settlement. Understanding DSU, however, Washington invoked the National Security Clause and suspended the consultations. As a result, Ottawa implemented retaliatory tariffs, which included a wide range of products from Kentucky bourbon to Florida oranges, Wisconsin cheese, and California wine. Recognizing the broader impact of the tariffs, the Bank of Canada noted in its July 2025 inflation report that the supply shock resulting from cross-border tensions has caused second-round effects in the core goods basket, adding 0.4 percentage points to headline inflation. However, the interest rate decision remained unchanged, as the bank also saw risks of slowing demand. The report's appendices included a sharp graph. While it was assumed that 10,200 trucks would pass through the Gordie Howe Bridge per day when it was completed in 2026, the post-tariff projection was down to 6,800. This meant a 33% meltdown in revenue. Investors also became increasingly uneasy. The Canada Pension Plan Investment Board (CPPIB) held a $280 million block of Gordie Howe project bonds. In its bond portfolio, the Risk Committee began discussing whether the bond would remain in the investment-grade category as credit rating agencies initiated a rating watch. Citing heterogeneous revenue streams, a lower rating meant higher swap spread costs for Ottawa. Meanwhile, people on the street watched the macro debate unfold as if it were a soap opera. Jill's family diner in Windsor lost a third of its daytime business when the factory closed 2 shifts. Cashier Janet lamented, "Even selling hamburgers is tied to the US. Canada rivalry, I get it now." At the Foxhole pub in Detroit's Greektown neighborhood, where logistics workers hang out weekly, karaoke was cancelled because most of the customers were contract drivers. As work dwindled, they stopped crossing the Michigan border to save on fuel. The Canadian Public Works Department's secret scenario, referred to as Plan C, is to open the bridge to vehicle traffic but reduce the toll for the first 10 years and finance the difference from the federal budget. There is also an attempt to attract the supply chain by offering American exporters a cross-border fast corridor incentive. Toronto-based columnists use the headline, "This is throwing good money after bad." The pro-government press argued, "Our promise on the bridge is our word. Backing down would damage our national reputation." In diplomacy, a surprising window of opportunity opened. Washington considered lowering the tariff from 25% to 15%, while Canada considered removing bourbon and orange juice from its retaliation list back. Channel messages from G7 capitals such as Ankara, Berlin, and Tokyo spread concerns about the damage that protectionism in North America would cause to the global supply chain. Models by the Montreal-based Serrano think tank predicted that if tariffs remained in place, US manufacturing exports would fall by 1.2% and Canadian exports by 2.4% by 2030. Not only the automotive industry, but also the aerospace, chemical, and logistics software sectors would suffer from the knock-on effect. Finally, as the last quarter of the year began, the bridge's structure was completed and asphalt. Paving began. The electronic sign announcing the opening date was updated to September 17, 2025. But the political calendar showed a sharp irony. The upcoming presidential election in the US had increased the bargaining power of the tariff card. No one wanted to touch a hot potato with bare hands. Ottawa decided to proceed, stating, "We will not cancel any opening. The bridge is Canada's gift." On the day of the opening ceremony, early morning fog shrouded the Detroit River, making the bridge's towers appear like mirages as the Canadian and American flags fluttered side by side at high altitude. A cold diplomatic photo was taken below in the protocol tent between Mark Carney and the U.S. Secretary of Transportation. In his speech, the secretary said, "Tariffs are a matter for negotiation. The bridge will serve our people." But the applause in the hall was cautious. Carney said, "The bridge is a line of hope. No one can cut the line of hope." But the tension on the faces of the Canadian workers could be seen as they cracked chestnuts. While the cameras rolled in the first week that followed, traffic remained weaker than expected. Some truck drivers opted for the Ambassador Bridge because the toll there was lower and their companies had not yet registered for the new route's electronic billing system. Automotive suppliers were still stuck in tariff uncertainty. The assembly line in Windsor was operating at partial capacity, and stockpiles were growing in Detroit's industrial park. The bridge office shared real-time data. Average daily traffic from September 17, 2024 was 6,740 vehicles. The feasibility study predicted 10,200 for the first year, but there was a silver lining. Logistics companies tested the bridge's AI-based pre-clearance lane embedded in the customs facility and confirmed that it was 35% faster than the Ambassador. This data raised hopes that the bridge would once again become a magnet if the tariff issue was resolved. Amazon Logistics planned to use Gordie Howe for 17,000 border crossings within 2 months of the pilot program, and UPS followed suit in the big picture. However, mutual accusations of economic blackmail between the two countries were still flying. Canada accused the US of hegemonic protectionism over tariffs on steel and softwood lumber, while Washington insisted it wanted privileges on critical minerals for energy security. The democracy-inflation dialectic swung into election speeches with the bridges. Towers cast in the shadow of political slogans in terms of bridge financing. The blow was shocking, but not fatal. The amortization period could be extended to 48 years. And the toll increase could be implemented gradually as the autumn wind blew through the metal cables along the Detroit River. The maintenance crane on top of the tower was busy fixing the wind curtains below the first truck emerging from the fog with its red and white license plate crossed into Canada and said to the customs officer, "Bless the hands that built this bridge." The officer smiled but inwardly thought, "Keeping the bridge standing now depends more on us than on diplomats." It is an irony of history that one day a barricade is erected between two countries, and the next day a bridge is built. But neither barricades nor bridges are made of steel. They need trust at midnight. The LED sign on the ramp of the Gordie Howe International Bridge still reads, "Welcome Bianu." As tariffs, lawsuits, retaliations, and election promises come and go, $5 billion worth of steel nerves have been laid to ensure that those two words remain permanent. Now millions of people in both Canada and the US are wondering whether the blood flow that keeps these steel nerves alive will return or whether friendship will fade into dim memories as the bridge rusts. The answer may lie in future budget talks at the international arbitration table or even in the microphones on the campaign trail. But one thing is certain on the day, that the lathes in Windsor's factories are back in full swing, and the overhead cranes in Detroit's foundries are once again sparking in the light of the night shift. Gordie House towers will no longer be carrying just steel bones, but also the backbone of a repaired neighbourhood. Until then, the bridge will continue to stand as a stark, unyielding reminder of the foggy political evenings on both sides, proving that the choice between uniting people and dividing them has a tangible, concrete metre-by-metre cost. What are your thoughts on this matter? Share your opinions in the comments section to stay updated on new videos. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching.